For today's reading group, we have Adam and Eloi presenting, the two lead authors for Diffusion for World Modeling, Visual Details Matter in Atari, a spotlight paper at NeurIPS this year. They introduce Diamond, a framework for building interactive world models that scales to complex 3D games such as CSGO. Adam is a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh, supervised by Professor Amos Storkey in the School of Informatics and Sam Devlin at Microsoft Research Cambridge. His research is focused on developing efficient reinforcement learning approaches via the use of world models, offline data, and human feedback. Eloi is a PhD student at the University of Geneva, supervised by Professor François Fleuret. His research is focused on world modeling via generative models and reinforcement learning.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sam. So as you mentioned, we're going to talk about diffusion for world modeling, which is joint work with Eloi and me. So I'm going to start off by talking about the kind of background and the project and the original paper. And then Eloi's going to talk about the extension to CSGO and the world model for that part at the end. So yeah, feel free to put any questions in the chat. If we can answer them as we go, we'll try. Otherwise, we'll hopefully leave enough time for all the questions at the end. So I think most of you probably have the background on the RL side, given it's the RL reading group, but just briefly. The motivation for kind of modern world models is often to improve sample efficiency of RL. The reason being that we can have an RL agent which interacts with an environment and then receives some kind of reward signal back from the environment to tell the agent how good or bad its actions were. And through repeating this many times can then learn to kind of improve its policy and receive more reward from the environment in the long term. But due to credit assignment and kind of non-stationarity, that can be quite difficult. And so an alternative approach is to try and learn a model of the environment from that experience. And then the agent can interact with that model in simulation, for example, and learn a policy with much fewer samples from the actual environment. So that works great. There's a good line of work on model-based RL, but it's important that the model accurately reflects the environment in order for the RL to work well, especially as otherwise the RL agent often acts as a kind of adversary trying to push the world model to the edge of its knowledge in order to maximize the reward. So the details and the accuracy of the world model are very important, especially for doing RL. So another way of framing world models is as generative models. But unlike video generation models, for example, they are conditioned on actions as well. And they must kind of reflect all possibilities resulting from taking a particular action, ideally with the same distribution as you get from the real environment or the world, and not just take kind of the most common or most likely actions as video generation models have the luxury of doing. Currently, discrete autoregressive models have been dominant for world model architectures. So examples include Iris, which is previous work of Eloi, Storm from Waipu Zhang, and Dreamer v3 is also another well-known one. And the reason for this is that by using discrete latents, you can help to reduce compounding error in autoregressive sequence modeling. But the downside is that the unwanted compression into discrete latents can mean that you need to increase the tokens per observation in order to accurately model images, which incurs a quadratic cost in the number of tokens. So concurrently, continuous diffusion models have become dominant for image and video generation. And this motivated the question of whether we could use diffusion for realistic and efficient world models. So now to provide a bit of background on the diffusion side, diffusion models originally come from the probabilistic denoising view, which I imagine most of you are familiar with, that you can take an image and you can add small perturbations, usually in the form of Gaussian noise, and then you can learn a model that for any given noise level is able to recover the original distribution of the data. And this is been gradually replaced by the score matching view, which can be seen as a kind of continuous generalization of this probabilistic denoising process, in which the diffusion model is learning the score function that we can see in the reverse SDE to take any given point in our data space with any given noise level and provide the score function towards the data distribution. And with this model, we can then inference time take a sample from Gaussian noise, and we can then follow the direction of the score function for a number of denoising steps until we reach the data distribution and have a sample of the data distribution. So in this work, we rely mostly on the score matching view, and we'll come back to kind of the number of steps that we take at inference time, as that was an important aspect of getting the world model to work. So how do we actually take diffusion and reinforcement learning and combine them together with a diffusion world model? Well, similarly to image generation models, we can take a diffusion model, but rather than condition on text, we can condition the diffusion model on the previous observation or observations and the previous action. And what this allows is then the diffusion model to generate the next observation from Gaussian noise. And we have a kind of illustrative sampling process here using some stochastic sampling that, again, we'll come back to. So you can see here that the action is to kick left, and then the diffusion model is going to take the previous observation here and generates the kick left action. And once you can do that, you can then sample from the diffusion model autoregressively, taking the generated observation and then adding that to the context to generate a full trajectory, which can be used to kind of simulate the environment. But what's important for getting this to work well? Well, in order to do RL in the world model, we require the following properties. So firstly, we need accurate modeling of environment dynamics, which means we need to get the model to accurately reflect the true distribution of states that arise from taking a particular action. And that requires, firstly, that the model is able to generate multimodal outputs and adhere to the conditioning, and in particular, the action that is input, and not just take the modal behavior. And luckily, this is something that diffusion models generally do quite well. But secondly, we also need the world model to be fast at inference time in order for an RL agent that's interacting with it to be able to learn something meaningful, given that, as we discussed previously, RL can be quite sample inefficient. And in practice, this ended up being a requirement for the world model to be able to run with few denoising steps, which is equivalent to forward passes of the model. And not only does it need to be fast, but as you reduce the number of denoising steps, you also need the error to be low enough that when you do the autoregressive generation, the model doesn't drift out of distribution and it can remain stable over long trajectories. So DDPM is a well-established candidate for the diffusion model. And we investigated this as a kind of MVP diffusion model to use for the world model and investigate whether DDPM satisfies these requirements. So we find that DDPM actually drifts with low numbers of denoising steps. So you can see here, if we take just a single denoising step, which means that there's only one forward pass of the diffusion model required for one environment step, that the error is large enough that the model drifts out of distribution very quickly. As we increase the number of denoising steps, the model drifts out of distribution more slowly. And if we go to 10, we see here that the model remains stable, at least for the kind of horizon being considered here of 1,000 time steps. But with an alternative diffusion model known as EDM, which relies on an improved objective, we're able to obtain a more stable world model, which is stable even with a single denoising step. So there's quite a few changes and adaptations that are made in the EDM model, but just to provide a bit of intuition at why, as to why EDM performs better with reduced numbers of denoising steps. So we can consider the DDPM objective to begin with. And the DDPM objective is to predict noise given the current noise level or time step. But this means that at low noise levels, we predict the noise, which is quite challenging, but that's fine. But at full noise, so if we take a fully noised image, then by predicting the noise, we're effectively just trying to predict the identity function on the input. And then that means that at inference time, if we take pure noise that's been sampled from a Gaussian, that it's by learning the identity, we have no kind of information on the signal. And so the first few denoising steps are not going to be able to remove the noise properly. And that's why we see that the DDPM objective doesn't work particularly well with few denoising steps. So it's better to instead use an adaptive training objective, which is what DDPM utilizes. So at low noise, we predict the noise as before, but now at high noise, we predict the image instead. And what this means is that in the kind of first denoising step, we're at least trying to get back to the data distribution and to predict a reasonable looking image even with a single time step. And the way that this is implemented is with kind of various wrapping functions that we can see here, so C in, C out. I won't go into too much details on those, but the main one of interest here is C skip, and that depends on the noise level being considered. And it's basically such that if the noise level is very low, then C skip is 1, which means that the objective of the network is to try and predict the difference between the clean image and the noised image, effectively the noise, as we had before with DDPM. But if the noise level is high, then C-skip goes to 0, and we just try and predict the clean image. So this objective achieves this kind of adaptiveness that we just mentioned. And that then, in turn, achieves the stability that we saw in the previous slide. Now, even though one denoising step was stable for EDM, we find that increasing the number of denoising steps still enables better multimodal generation. So you can see here in the game boxing, the white player is controlled by the player, so the actions that are being input, but the black player is the opponent and is moving in a somewhat random way. And so in some cases may move left, in some cases may move right. And this multimodalness means that sometimes the model actually predicts that the opponent disappears, as we see for 1 and 2 steps. And this can be intuitively understood with the score function view that we took before, in that if we sample from our Gaussian inference time and we take a single denoising step, we might end up interpolating between different modes by going straight to the data distribution. Whereas with increased numbers of denoising steps, we can afford to take a curved path as we follow the reverse SDE and are more likely to end up at a particular mode of the data distribution. So in our case, we chose to go with 3 denoising steps for the final model and for the Atari games. And we found that this enables pretty good modeling of the games and all of the visual details. And in particular, the continuous diffusion avoids this flickering issue, which arises from discrete tokenization of prior world models based on transformer architectures using discrete tokens. So in particular for the game Breakout here, we can see that the model relies on a limited number of tokens. And so what happens is that as at inference time, when the model is trying to predict the next observation, it has to sample one of these tokens, and it may sample a token which differs from one time step to the next, which causes the flickering that you see in the bricks here because there's such a large number of configuration of bricks. Whereas with diffusion, it's much easier to rely on the previous observation, and we see a much more kind of stable configuration of bricks. And similarly, the diffusion model is better able to model details, such as the small dots that appear on the road representing rewards in the game Roadrunner, and also enabling the better consistency of the kind of enemies and rewards in the game Asterix. And then this kind of accurate visual modeling that we see here then enables an RL agent learning from these environments to obtain better performance in many cases. So yeah, for example, we can see that some of the games where it appears as though Diamond's diffusion world model is better able to model the details, we find that the RL agent is able to obtain a higher score. And so that was the kind of main results of the original paper, which we submitted to NeurIPS. But it was at that point then that we thought we were done, and I will hand over to Eloi to talk a bit more about the next stage of the project.
Do we have time for a couple of questions or in between?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay? I was just wondering, so when you use EDM and use a single step to denoise, and you use this version of the objective that essentially you're trying to predict the image, right? Because it's high noise. How high the noise is the actual, what is the level of noise you have there? Is it complete noise, like the signal of the original image is completely destroyed, or is it there's still a bit of signal in there?
Yeah, so at training time, you add noise to the image of varying amounts. And so you always start from an image, but the idea is that the maximum amount of noise that you add is completely dominating the image. So you're effectively equivalent to a kind of a full noise sample that you'll get at inference time.
But so if you get a full noise sample, isn't the best thing that the model can do predict just the average, the mean of the distribution?
Yeah.
Instead.
But you're conditioned on the previous image.
Okay. So since you condition on the previous image, then you and it's quite it's a dynamics. It's a game, so like it's going to have a lot of relationships. So it would be like the average outcome from that frame that it would be creating.
Given that action, exactly.
So you're conditioned on the previous observation and action, and then you would generate the most common resulting observation. But if you have a stochastic environment with multiple outcomes, then you wouldn't necessarily generate all of the possibilities that we talked about previously, which is important for a world model, but maybe less so like a video generation model.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. And the second quick question I had is I noticed on the performance of the games in Atari that some of the games were so like on average you do better, but like some of the games were underperforming or even like close, very under in terms of scores. And do you have an intuition of is there like a common properties that these games have that don't make them really suitable for a diffusion world model?
So common property maybe not but definitely we observed some things. For instance, in the game Demon Attack, you have a lot of like very bright flashes, and this was kind of maxing the loss and in practice acting as a oversampling these things. And so at inference, the model will just generate a lot of flashes because it will pay a big cost on them at training. And so the inference time world model was definitely not looking like the game because it just kept flashing. So the agent couldn't learn anything in that, for instance, and this was the case for several games.
Okay, that's very interesting actually. I guess that also relates to like the way they train like video generation models. They have to curate the data quite a lot to avoid these sort of glitches, right?
Yeah, it's hard to determine kind of exactly what makes something work or not for each individual game, especially with, you know, RL being quite high variance and things like that. But yeah, in general, it seemed like, at least for some of the games we looked at, that where there were these kind of details that were important for RL that the diffusion model was able to capture better, that it was able to get better performance. But it's a trade-off, as Eloi says, because in some games, then the objective of the diffusion model doesn't work as well as the tokenization. You know, maybe in particular, if there was a kind of long sequence or kind of memorization required, that then the transformer-based world model might have advantages.
Okay, so something like Montezuma, for example, would be more favored to the transformer style approach.
Yeah,
So like you have this long dependency.
we never investigated that game, but yeah, I think that would be interesting.
Okay, thanks a lot for the answers, guys. Maybe
Yeah.
there's another question from the audience, but if not, like please keep going. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll hand over to you, Eloi.
All right, thanks for the interesting questions. So as Adam said, at that point of the talk, we are basically done with the original submission and accepted manuscript. But following some like other teams' experiments on 3D games and world models, we decided anyway to try if Diamond would give anything on 3D environments. And we already had like early experiments on Counter-Strike in the paper. So we were like, all right, let's try to train the final version of Diamond on that game. So yeah, so we applied Diamond's diffusion world model to the popular map Dust 2 from Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and we took a can you just yes. So we made basically 4 changes to the setup of Diamond. So first, we have no reinforcement learning. We used a fixed data set of 95 hours of gameplay, and we trained on 87 hours and tested on 8 hours. So basically, we didn't do data collection online with an agent. And for that, we used a data set that was open source from a previous paper of Tim Pierce, which is on our project. We also used a 2-stage pipeline. So this was quite crucial. We performed dynamics prediction in low resolution. So namely, we divided by 5 the resolution on each axis. So we do next image prediction in that like small image. And then we have a second smaller network to get back to the original resolution. And that was very important to reduce the training cost because the small image was way less costly in terms of VRAM. And yeah, we could just use a much bigger model, bigger batch size to do the actual memorizing of the map. And the upsampling thing was quite easy. So we could use a much smaller model just to kind of in-paint the missing details. So yeah, we scaled the diffusion model from Atari, so from 4.4 million parameters to roughly 400 millions. So yeah, almost a times 100 scale up. We didn't have the opportunity to try many architectures. We basically did one run, so it mostly followed the data scaling we had. So from 100K on Atari to 87 hours correspond to 5 million frames. So it was roughly a 100K again. So yeah, that was kind of and what we could use on our GPUs. But yeah. And the final detail that was more like post-training, we realized that using stochastic sampling for the upsampler was crucial to improve the visual quality. We did not find it necessary for the dynamics model, for the world model itself, but when it came to in painting the missing details, it was quite important to add noise during the sampling of the diffusion model to get more details, basically. So all the videos we are looking at are generated with the CSGO world model we trained. And so the actions come from a human player because we don't have an agent. It's like Stefan, our colleague, that is a good CSGO player. He just spent an afternoon playing in the thing for us to record videos. So this model was trained during 12 days on RTX 4090. And at the end, like Stefan could play it around 10 FPS with keyboard and mouse on a 3090. And like we had several surprises. For instance, the fact that it could be controlled surprisingly well with the mouse. So it was not trivial to plug the mouse control in the world model, but once we did it, we were super surprised by how well the world model will respond to basically to mouse movement. So it felt very natural for a gamer like Stefan to play it. Also, if we just, for instance, look at the one in the middle, sign in Arabic, just to show some things. So you can see that this blue sign is modeled surprisingly well. The one on the bottom left corner, shadow and light. So you can see that when you're in the tunnel, the weapon is like dark, and when you will reach the light region, the weapon will gradually be lighter, these kind of things. So yeah, you can just go on the website and look at them in details, but that's kind of a cherry picking of the fun things we observed. So this video is just a full run, like I think it's 1,000 time steps, so roughly 1 minute 40. And the point is that basically the model doesn't drift too much. So for instance, in that run, Stefan could just run across the entire map mostly, and the model was just able to kind of follow, which is super surprising to us with only 87 hours of data and autoaggressive generation. Like so many opportunity to drift out of distributions and things. So that was quite a good surprise. So yeah, there's no point looking at the full thing, but basically it's a very long generation that goes surprisingly well. So this clip is interesting because basically you can see that if the player inputs several jumps in a row, the world model can kind of lets you do that. So that's obviously a bug. We hypothesize that it's because we don't have example of people jumping mid-air in the dataset. So the world model cannot learn that jumping mid-air doesn't do anything. That's because we have human gameplay, and very, very few humans try to jump mid-air because when you're a good player, you know that it's just not useful. So that's mostly why. But the interesting thing of this failure mode is that it somehow shows, at least to us, that the world model was able to generalize the effect of a jump. And that's quite interesting because we could imagine that the model would have learned the effect of a jump at every place of the map and just kind of learn that by heart. But the fact that it lets you jump several times in a row like that and just move the 3D geometry of the scene kind of indicates that it kind of integrates a general pattern of what jumping means. So yeah, we found that failure mode very interesting. These are proper limitations of our model that are quite to be expected. So the first one, for instance, when you do fast mouse movements, the model kind of generates blurry things as it should, but then it gets lost, like it kind of loses its context and just hallucinates things. The second and third one are kind of the same, is when you hit a wall and then you kind of walk back, you very often end up being teleported somewhere else on the map. So that's easily understood from the fact that we have a very short memory of the past. So if you hit a wall, you kind of lose track of where you were, and so the model just generates a new kind of place to go. The last one is weapon morphing. So you can see that sometimes the weapon was kind of changing without us asking anything. This one is very likely due to not like we don't have a lot of data. As a point of comparison, we have like 0.5% of the data that was used for game engine on Doom, so like 200 times less. And yeah, the Minecraft model that were released recently, like a couple of weeks ago, had, I don't remember, like roughly 1,000 times more. So basically, in terms of data and compute, we are very, very limited. So yeah, that was quite a good surprise, the quality of the model with so little data. And so as we wrote, we expect that some limitations would kind of be fixed by just scaling data and compute. But obviously, this wouldn't fix everything, in particular architectural limitations like short memory, like the hit wall and teleport failure mode would just, it's kind of a feature. So I guess that's the final slide. So you can see Stefan actually playing on the 3090. So you can really see that he's just playing with the mouse and it's very responsive. Something that was great is that Stefan is a super good CSGO player, so he kind of stick to the action distribution much more than I would have done. So I think that helped the videos otherwise, because he was really playing much like the dataset. Yeah, you can very easily clone our code and download the model. Everything is open source, the training pipeline, the inference pipeline, and all the Atari models are open source too. So we would be very happy for you to try it and build upon our work. And you can visit the website diamondwn.github.io for basically seeing again these videos and most of the messages we explained here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Eloi, for the and Adam for the great talk. That was super interesting. I'm going to open the floor for questions, but something I want to add as well on this the CSGO world model is that it's been blowing up past the academic world. It's been very popular on Twitter and on Hacker News. I think part of it is because probably you were constrained with the compute and you had to make it run at on a basically consumer GPU. And I think people are really excited to get to be able to play it. Maybe I lead straight into a question from that, is that right now you are running at 10 FPS, which is good enough for a human to play, but for an RL agent, it would be too slow to train in. And there is also this memory, I guess, problem of you don't have that much memory, so it would be hard to stay consistent for extended periods of time. So what do you, how would you, or what are the biggest changes you could make or you could work on to, do you think it could be very impactful to improve the FPS and or the memory of this model, besides just scaling them up with more compute?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, just to increase the inference, we have obvious optimization that we didn't run at all. Like we still use float 32, like a bunch of things like that. For the general quality of the model, and for instance, to be able to train an agent in it, I really think that we should need like order of magnitudes more data, because for instance, the players were never generated because I think it was like just too rare events and probably too stochastic, too random. So yeah, that would be the first thing to make it a bit more robust.
But I think yeah, also worth pointing out that the CSGO data set is only like videos and actions, so there's no real task or reward signal to do an RL experiment in any case. So it might need to be applied to a different environment, like a Minecraft type thing.
All right, fair enough. You wouldn't be able to run if there's no like environment or benchmark setup for CSGO. That makes sense. Yeah, just to maybe bounce on that, like when you were talking about it's important to be in data distribution, especially because you have quite a small data set. I noticed as well in the video where you had showing the repeated jumps, right? That the world is rendered much better where the player is in a spot where you can still access if you were to jump from the ledge of the map.
Yes, absolutely.
And something a lot of players do, right? When they want to go quickly from like that part of the map to either like the A side or like the, well, I mean, somewhere else, like they will jump off, right? So you have that data.
Yeah, definitely. And on that very point, there is a heat map on the dataset of Tim Pierce, like on the paper, going with the dataset. And if you look at the heat map of where people spend the most of their time in the map, it strongly correlates to where the world model is more robust. So if you go to parts of the map where we don't have enough data, to put it simply, it's very easy to get the world model to drift. And if you stay in the parts of the map where all the kind of fighting happens and things, it's kind of surprisingly reliable.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, well, thanks again, guys. I'm going to stop the recording now and then open the floor for question.